Did you ever experience something that truly frightened you as a child? Not a monster in a movie, not a story someone told. I mean, something you saw, something you heard, something that happened that you still think about years later. This is Static Hour, a late-night broadcast of strange and unsettling stories from the darkest corners of the internet. I'm Brittany, and we're officially on the air. Tonight's stories are about childhood memories that never quite faded, the strange things we accepted, the things nobody believed, and the moments that made us realize the world might not be as safe as we thought. These stories aren't about proving whether ghosts exist. They're about the memories that stayed with us long after childhood ended. The ones that didn't quite make sense. The ones we never completely forgot. So tonight, leave a light on and ask yourself, what's the oldest memory you still can't explain? Our first story tonight comes from the user CarAdministrative424 from the subreddit Paranormal, and it was posted about a year ago. And it's called, I Saw Someone in My Room as a Child Back in 2008. I was born in 1999, and around 2008, when I was about 9 years old, I lived with my mom, stepdad, and two sisters. An older sister 2 years older than me, and a younger sister 4 years younger, on the third floor of an apartment building in the south of France. The apartment wasn't very big and had only 2 bedrooms, one at each end of the apartment. We were set up like this. My stepdad, mom, and little sister shared one bedroom near the living room, and my older sister and I shared the second bedroom. The apartment was in an old building that had been renovated several times but still felt ancient. We sometimes heard strange things. My mom once heard the sound of blankets dragging across the hallway outside her room. Thinking it was my older sister sleepwalking, which she did occasionally, my mom opened the door, but as soon as she did, the sound stopped. Another time, she and my stepdad were woken up by someone aggressively rattling their bedroom doorknob. They even had out-of-body experiences on occasion. One night in 2008, I was sleeping in my room with my sister when I woke up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason. Slowly, I opened my eyes, and since I was facing the wall, I turned over. And that's when I saw it. There was a figure standing in the middle of the room. A man. He was just standing there, looking into the distance. He was facing my sister's side of the room, but not looking at her directly. I froze, paralyzed with fear. I kept watching him, but I squinted my eyes pretending I was still asleep so he wouldn't notice me. The man wasn't very tall. He looked older, a bit overweight, with medium-length curly blonde hair, big round glasses, and a brown robe that as a child I described as being made of burlap. He wore what I called a painter's hat and held a golden bowl in his right hand with a candle inside it. Here's the weirdest part. The candle only lit him. The rest of the room stayed pitch black. Even the small star and moon-shaped mirrors my mom had hung on the wall didn't reflect the candlelight. He looked lost, like he didn't know where he was, and was fumbling around in the dark. He took cautious, tiny steps, looking around nervously. My first instinct was to hide under the covers as quietly as I could. Once I was under the blanket, I started telling myself it had to be a dream. I remembered seeing cartoon characters pinch themselves to check if they were dreaming, so I started pinching my forearm as hard as I could. Ooh, ow. And then I slowly peeked out from under the blanket. He was still there. I squeezed my eyes shut as tightly as possible, thinking that if I opened them, he'd be gone. But when I opened them, he was still there. I tried again. Squeezed my eyes shut, opened them, still there. Again. Squeeze my eyes shut, open them, still there. One more time. Squeeze my eyes shut, open them, gone. People have told me that it must have been sleep paralysis, but as far as I know, I've never had it before or since. Plus, sleep paralysis is called that for a reason. You're supposed to be paralyzed, right? But I wasn't. We moved out of the apartment a few years later. The neighbor below us moved into our old place. Her son and I were friends, but we lost contact over the years. So I have no idea if they ever experienced anything similar. Okay, so if you look at the comments on this one, there's some really interesting ones. One user says it might have been a ghost, confused on how things looked because it wasn't like that when he lived there. Pretty harmless, probably didn't even know you were there. Or it could have been an imprint. A hallucination of sorts because that person was once alive and stood in that room so much that he left an imprint. His soul is on the other side, or back in a new body, but he left an imprint there because maybe he loved the building and spent his whole life in it. So there was an emotional attachment. Either way, it would be cool to experience as an adult. The OP responds, one thing I haven't mentioned is that the front door of this apartment was located in a dead-end street, about 30 to 40 meters further at the end of the cul-de-sac. There was a large iron gate that served as the back entrance of the town's church where I used to live. I know it was common at one time for monks not to live in the church itself, but in housing nearby. And when I think about the guy I saw, I can't help but feel that he had a bit of a monk-like vibe. He might be an imprint, yes. I'm personally more into the imprint theory than the soul theory. I liked that story, to be honest. And a lot of the commenters on there also did as well. I think that it was intriguing. I didn't get like the spooky, like creepy factor from it, but obviously it would be terrifying as a child to see someone who's not really there be there. But from the sound of the story, I get more of what a lot of the commenters were saying were the imprint vibes instead of the scary, spooky, like I'm here to haunt you and cause chaos in your life kind of vibes. I don't know. I thought it was a good story to start the night off. And let's move on to story number 2. This is from user Johnny Psychotic from the subreddit Paranormal, posted 10 years ago. And it's called, Does Anyone Else Remember Having an Imaginary Friend That Might Not Have Been Imaginary Looking Back on It? When I was between 3 and 6, I had 3 imaginary friends. 3 were usual little kid stuff, like they were invisible and friendly, and I only heard them in my head. My 3rd friend, she was not invisible. I could see her. I called her Bra and Underpants Girl because that's all she had on. I can still see her in my mind, clear as day. She looked almost black and white, like a black lacy underwear contrast with pale skin, and what I always thought was dirt around frazzled blonde hair. I can't even wrap my head around it. How would I have been able to come up with a friend like that at 3? While my other 2 friends were nice, she wasn't. She wasn't mean, just really sad. constantly. If asked where she lived, she'd say, "Those woods," points to the forest behind my house. I'd tell her she could stay in my house, but she'd just say, "I can't." It wasn't a big deal stopping seeing her. I just remember around 5 or 6, I stopped seeing her. Does anyone else remember actually seeing their childhood imaginary friends? If so, do you think it was something more? And the reason why I read this story was because the comments on this story are insanely good. And I want to share those. Some of these are going to be a little bit longer, but the thought of an imaginary friend is pretty normal when you think about childhood, but then you dive deeper into the fact of what could it have been? Sure, kids have vivid imaginations. I can tell you countless stories that not of things that my daughter has seen, but just stories that she has told because her imagination is so vast. But there are times when you hear a story kind of like this and you're like, okay, I don't think that was just an imaginary friend. I think that there is more to it. And these comments below, these experiences of other people are really, really good. So I'm going to share a couple of these. One user said, "I had some. I remember that I was always excited and would rush to go to bed, something that a kid never does. I would ask to go to bed early so I could see them. My bedroom was set out in a sort of U shape. My bed was in the middle and everything was set around facing me. I didn't have a TV in my room and I only had the basics. Hey, I was 5. I remember me laying on my bed, it being pitch black with only some light coming in from my curtains when 2 kids would come out. I didn't know where they came from. They seemed to step out of the darkness and would sit on my bed and talk to me about my day. They would say things like calling me a silly Billy. My dog Sophie would often come rushing into my room to jump on the bed. I would calm her down, kissing and petting her, but upon looking up, the girls were always gone. I think my room was being decorated with new wallpaper and I stayed in my parents' bed for a few nights. They put me in bed with some warm milk, cookies, and a Disney film on their TV. The 2 girls would come out from my room and sit on my parents' bed and watch the film with me. I remember grabbing some cookies and my glass of milk and offering it to them, and one of them looked really happy, shocked, and the other girl shaking her head saying, "We can't." They both had white night dresses on and their hair was in a bun. They never had any shoes on, and they would come and see me almost every night up until I was 7. I honestly can't remember their names. It was over 20 years ago. They always seemed terrified when my dog would run into their rooms and vanish. My mom later found out that 15 years before, 2 young girls got attacked by a neighbor's dog in our yard and unfortunately died. Those poor babies. And the fact that they're still there, but it's sweet that they found friends later on in life, though. It's so sweet. Oh, the next commenter said, "I was an imaginative kid and had several imaginary friends, but my first one was different than the rest. When I was 2 or 3, I had an imaginary friend named Karen. My whole family knew about her, and I would insist she be treated like a real person. Unlike my later fantasy folks, my mom would hear me carrying on whole conversations with her alone and was always a little curious where I had come up with the whole thing. It seemed more complex than toddler pretend, like I genuinely thought she was a person and that people were being inconsiderate to her by not acknowledging her. Sometimes to humor me, my parents would out of the blue be like, 'Well, hello, Karen,' and I'd glare replying, 'She's not here right now.' We ended up moving, and once we did, Karen wasn't mentioned anymore. Since I was young and don't remember too much, just a warm feeling like an old friend. My mom asked me about it when I got older, and I told her I could confidently remember making up my other later imaginary friends, Howard the Duck and his girlfriend Chuck, but not Karen. She told me she always wondered if I was seeing something she wasn't, but no harm ever came of it, and so she didn't worry. Well, I'm in my 30s now and was reading an article about a case that changed how soon you could report a missing person. As I read, I realized it was sort of near where I used to live, and the girl was named Karen. I didn't think much of it. It was a city, crimes happen. As I read further, I learned that Karen's murderer had buried her body in the town that I had lived. At that point, not expecting much, but rather curious, I texted my mom for the address of our old house. As it turns out, Karen was murdered, then buried about 1.5 miles from our old home. Now, I'm not saying that I'm 100% sure this Karen was my Karen and the whole thing had happened a little over a decade before my parents had even bought the house. My mom had never even heard of the case, and as it was, would have long been out of headlines. I still haven't found a picture of the girl and sometimes wonder if I'd recognize her, even though she died before I was even born. Regardless, the whole thing was a sad story, and that young lady didn't deserve such an awful end. If she was my Karen, it's even sadder her spirit lingered and only had a toddler for a friend. It breaks my heart. Oh, to imagine. Oh my gosh. Nope. Oh, and the next commenter says, I had an imaginary friend when I was 5 or 6. Her name was Becky Reeder, and she was maybe 8 or 9, had curly brown hair, and was slightly pudgy. I had her as a friend for about 2 to 3 years. She and I would hang out in the downstairs of my house and color, play with dolls, and sometimes play outside. She would never come upstairs though, and I never found out why. She would just go away when I went upstairs. One night, she invited me to a party, and I was excited because she said I could meet her family. She had a mom and dad, grandparents, an older sister, and an aunt. She told me that the party was by the water, like a 10-minute drive from my house, and that it would be so much fun. I told her I couldn't leave, and she said we could sneak out. I started out the door when my mom heard and came to investigate. She asked me what I was doing, and I told her that I was going with Becky to a party to meet her family. My mom told me I couldn't go, and I threw a fit because I really wanted to go. My mom picked me up and went to take me to bed. I calmed down and was just laying there watching the ceiling when I heard the noise by the bedroom door. Becky was upstairs, and she was standing there. I waved at her and whispered, "I'm sorry." And Becky said, "I hate you," and walked out of the room. I never saw her again after that. I tried Googling deaths in the area or asking around, but nobody knows anything. I talked to my mom about it when I was older, and she said she was very alarmed because I was so adamant to go to the party, even though it wasn't real. Something about all of those just make you, that changes your childhood forever. And there are so many other really, really good stories from that particular post. I will post them in the show notes so that you can go back and read if you want to look into it. Because it is an old post, 10 years, there are tons of other stories from other commenters. And they're really, really good. So if you want to check them out, the posts will be in the show notes, either on YouTube or on Spotify or wherever you are listening to your podcast. And I really want to hear your guys' thoughts on it. Our next story comes from the user Existing Jury 9613 from the subreddit True Scary Stories, and it was posted a year ago or so. And it's called Who are they? Ever since I was very little, I've always been interested in the paranormal. Many things have happened to me to make me believe in this type of stuff. However, I have a couple of stories that really hammer the nail into the coffin. I suppose the first indication that something was wrong was around when I was 5. My mother had slept in my brother's room with the dog, and it was just us two home. I heard her waking up and taking a work call, and woke up as well. Then I headed downstairs to the kitchen. I thought I heard her coming down the stairs, so I turned around and saw not her, but a man. He appeared as to be what I'd call today the Hat Man. He tilted his fedora in what I'd assume as a farewell or greeting and disappeared. Then my day went normally. How does your day go normally after something like that? Random dude pops in to your house, tips his hat at you, and then disappears, and you're like, well, no, okay. I digress. Let's continue, because apparently that's not the first one. The biggest thing that ever happened to me in the paranormal sense was who I called Marina. I called her that, but I doubt that's her real name. When I was the ages 6 to 12, a ghostly woman with black hair would sit on the edge of my bed and hum comfortingly all night. Why does that give me chills to think of a ghostly woman humming to you all night? I don't know if you saw our Alabama episode when we talked about like hugging Molly screaming in your ear and how terrifying that might be, but a woman who doesn't belong there sitting at the edge of your bed and humming to you, I personally would find terrifying. I don't know, maybe that's just me. Okay. Some nights she whispered things I couldn't comprehend. And the only thing was that every night, every week, every month, every year, she grew gradually closer to my face. So this woman was like inching up closer. Oh. Thankfully, around my 12th birthday, I switched bedrooms with my brother after he moved out. I haven't seen her since, but some nights I feel like she's there. I feel her presence outside of the door. I know she wants me to come back. I won't go back. No, don't go back. I go into that room, which is now my mother's office, as rarely as possible. I don't have any dead close relatives that were buried nearby, for anybody wondering. Nowadays, I just hear voices that aren't there or see things that aren't real, but I still wonder about the ghosts of my childhood. If anything, why me? One, I wonder if you've got like a spiritual touch, and there's that. Two, don't go back. Definitely don't go back into that room. And I also want to know, why you? That is terrifying. That's so terrifying. I'm sorry. What? No. Why is there a creepy ghost lady just like inching closer to you, starts off at the foot of your bed, and then all of a sudden just starts like, all right, I'm going to slowly just get a little closer and a little closer and a little closer, and I'll take the Hat Man tipping his hat to you all day over a woman with long dark hair humming to you in the middle of the night. Every time. Both are terrifying, but every time. Oh, goodness gracious. Oh my goodness gracious. Whew. All right. Moving on to the next story, though. This is from user BetterIce3. 331 from the subreddit True Scary Stories, and it was posted around a year ago. And it's called Them Outside the Window. I've posted on here twice about distinct events that happened when I was a child and an adult. But there's more that happened out in Roy, Washington that I and my brother had blocked out or thought were just nightmares that we had kept to ourselves. Not realizing that we had the same experiences until later on when we talked about creepy things around our home. Like the teen boy with the small afro and the bloody shirt that I saw throughout the years, or the deer carcass in the middle of an abandoned house. Events like these, we were told, were our imaginations or bad dreams by our parents. Up until a few days ago, as a 30-year-old man, do I remember and believe that many of these events happened. My twin brother texted me asking if I remember people outside our window in the backyard and just beyond the fence in the woods. A memory came crashing back into my mind. Something I had forgotten that terrified me to the bone. A chill went through my body just thinking about it. My childhood home is in the middle of the woods in Roy, Washington. Roy is your typical small town in Washington consisting of a gas station, an elementary school, and we lived about a mile or two outside of the town itself, down a long gravel road with thick trees on either side. I'm not gonna lie, that sounds kind of cozy. I didn't know what light pollution was until I moved out at 18. Wow. Roy was considered to be part of the Nisqually tribe land. So sorry if I butchered that. Before the town was founded in 1809. One night, when I was 11 years old, I woke up to the feeling of eyes around me. My curtains were shut and my window was open. All that I could see, with what little light the moon had to offer when my curtains would blow from a gust of spring air, was a bedroom with comic books on a beanbag chair, action figures on a bookshelf, and a messy closet. I turned on my lamp to take a better look around my room. No scary figures in the corner magically turned into a pile of clothes, or ghosts turning into a hanging coat. Everything was as I left it when I went to sleep. Even though I was not scared of monsters under the bed at that age, I still checked there. I switched off my lamp and settled back in my bed. It wasn't long after that this feeling of pupils directed toward me returned. I sit back up, taking in my surroundings once more with nothing but the same as before. This feeling felt more concentrated towards my window. I peek my head from under my curtains, letting them drape over the back of my head. 10 figures stood scattered in my backyard, facing the house. Y'all, I haven't read this one yet. Oh, okay. Ooh, what? Some 10 feet from the house, some 20, some behind the fence. I couldn't see more, but I felt more in the woods. I could not make out their faces with the light of the night sky. Their faces were blurry, distorted like static, and dark. I could not see the eyes that peered at me, but nevertheless, I could feel their unwavering gaze. I could hear a soft melody being emitted from one, then another would let out a melody, followed by another and another, until it reached back to the first, like communication that wasn't a jarbled up mess of noises, but more like a soft tune being carried by the wind. I went to wake up my parents in the next room. My mom told me that I had a nightmare and that it was nothing. I told her to look outside in the backyard. My dad, now awake, told me that he would go check it out. He may have believed that it was a nightmare as well, but after news of a neighbor having a break-in the week prior, he wasn't going to take the chance of trespassers. He went in the dark to the kitchen window downstairs. Nothing. He told me it was safe and to go to bed. I remember as I was going back into my room, my twin brother was walking out of my parents' room. By the morning, I was convinced it was a nightmare, and like many nightmares I had as a child, it slipped away from my memory. Until my twin brother texted me and asked if I remember people in our backyard. He had a similar experience on that night. He caught them leaving, though. When he heard me and my dad walking down the stairs, he saw these figures dissipate like dirt being swept away like the wind. By the time my dad and I were downstairs, they were gone. He remembers the tune that passed through them. He catches himself whistling it when he does the dishes or drives to work. We both don't know what they were. They didn't seem like people, ghosts, or spirits. They felt like something older than a ghost, something more connected to what was in the land. We just call them, for the lack of a better name. We never saw them again, and they faded into nothing in my mind. That is so spooky. So spooky. Oh. The fact that his brother still whistles the tune while doing the dishes or like mindlessly doing things, I personally will like whistle like random tunes whenever I'm doing something, but it being from them is terrifying. Like so terrifying. Oh my goodness. Ooh. Oh my goodness. For the next story, we are going to do something a little different. As you know by now, I normally share a little story that I have written myself, inspired by urban legends, folklore, and other things that keep us up at night. But tonight's story isn't fiction. It's a memory that I have from my own childhood. And it's something that happened to me when I was 7 or 8 years old. And even now, I'm not even going to say how many years later, I still don't know what to make of it. And before I continue into the story, I do want to give a quick warning that this story does contain references to gun violence and murder-suicide and distressing themes involving a child. So if that is something that is incredibly disturbing to you, or you have children who listen to things and you don't want them to hear anything like that, go ahead and skip through and we won't be offended, because we totally understand. You gotta protect yourself in this. But this is my story that altered how I viewed things in my childhood. I don't know if what I experienced was a dream. I don't know if it was a nightmare, and I don't know if it was something else entirely. What I do know is that it happened over and over and over again when I was a child. I was probably around 7 years old when it started. At first, I thought it was a bad dream, but then it happened again and again and again. Almost every night for nearly a year. Almost every time, it started the same way. I would be pulled from sleep by the sound of a woman screaming. Not a distant sound either. Not something that would be muffled or jumbled in a dream. A scream so desperate and full of anguish that it would jolt me awake. My eyes would snap open and my heart would begin racing. Then I would hear a little girl crying. I would know exactly what was coming next. The clock would often read about 2:15 in the morning on my red, glowing alarm clock. The sound always came from outside my bedroom window. And despite knowing what I was about to see, I would sit up and look anyway, pulled by a compulsion to do so. Standing outside my window was a woman holding a young girl, probably around 12 or 13 years old. The girl clung tightly to her. Both of them were crying. The little girl would beg through tears, "Daddy, no, please, no." The woman could barely get the words out. "Why?" Over and over again, "Why?" Then another voice would cut through the night, cold and dark, a man's voice, angry and loud. "Shut up!" The woman and child would flinch in fear. "Shut up," he would scream again. They would cling to each other tighter, and every time he yelled, something inside me would tell me not to look, but I always did. Slowly, I would glance to the left of my window, and there he was, a man standing a short distance away from the woman and child, a gun in his hand. Even now, all these years later, I can remember the feeling that came over me when I saw him. Not confusion, not curiosity, fear. The kind of fear that makes every alarm in your body start screaming. The kind of fear that tells you something terrible is about to happen. Then came two sharp cracks in the darkness. The woman and little girl disappeared, just like that. The screaming stopped. The crying stopped. Everything became silent, and for a brief moment, the world seemed frozen. I was frozen. Then the man would turn slowly, look directly at me, almost zoom into my window, and look me dead in the eyes. Not through me like you hear some ghosts doing, but at me. His eyes would lock onto mine through the darkness outside my bedroom window, and every instinct I had told me I wasn't supposed to be seeing this. And somehow I had witnessed something I shouldn't have. And then he slowly would raise the barrel to his own head, and he stared at me through the glass. Something would change. The anger that had filled his face moments before would disappear. In its place was grief. I could feel the overwhelming grief. But there was something else there too, something deeper, something I couldn't understand as a child and still struggle to explain as an adult today. Regret, sorrow, despair, a mixture of all three. For a brief moment, he would simply stare at me. Another sharp crack would echo through the night, and the scene would vanish. Just like that, I don't remember falling asleep afterwards. I only remember waking the next morning with my heart racing, trying to convince myself it was just a dream. Trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But then the next night would come and it would happen again. The same woman, the same little girl, the same man, the same words echoing through the night. Night after night, the same ending. For nearly a year. And then one day, it stopped. Not gradually, not less often. It stopped the moment I moved away. I eventually went to live with my dad. And that's when it all stopped. I had a new room, a new neighborhood, a new state, a different window. And from the very first night, the dreams never came back. Not once. It made me question, with there being no woman screaming, no little girl crying, no man standing in the darkness, the silence at 2:15 in the morning. To this day, I don't know anything about the land that my mother had bought when I was a child. I don't know who those people were. I don't know why I saw the same scene unfold outside my bedroom window over and over again. Maybe it was nothing more than a recurring nightmare. Maybe my imagination created something so vivid that became impossible to forget. Or maybe it was something else, something imprinted on the land. All I know is that decades later, I can still hear the woman's scream echoing through my mind. I can still see the little girl clinging to her mother, and I can still see that man's face, cold, staring back at me through the darkness. Sometimes late at night, I find myself wondering why a 7-year-old little girl spent nearly a year waking up at 2:15 in the morning to watch the same tragedy unfold beneath her bedroom window. And if it was only a dream, why did it stay with the house? And so we move on to our next story. This one is from user SilverShadow5, and it's from the subreddit True Scary Stories, and it was posted about 4 months ago, and it's called A Childhood Memory. I have 2 stories from my childhood that are likely connected. The first is from when I was in elementary school. The house we lived in was kind of like a ranch or prairie style, the majority being on ground level. You climb up the front porch and enter into the living room, which went directly into the dining room and then straight line to the kitchen and back porch. The bedrooms and bathroom came off of the dining room. The basement and attic were accessible by a small hallway connecting the kitchen and back porch. One summer day, my brothers and I were playing hide and seek. My brother M was a seeker. After some time hiding in the attic and not being found, I managed to sneak to the dining room, hoping to hide under the dining room table. When I crawled under, M was there, but staring at me intently, before running to the back porch in a human imitation of a wolf or dog or such. Believing I was safe, I crawled out of the table to get caught by M, who was in the living room petting our dog. Obviously, what was under the table wasn't my brother. But then, what was it? Flash to a few years later, I'm now in middle school. The typical thing is that my grandparents pick us up from school and we stay at their house until whichever parent gets out of work first to come and get us. This one day, I am going up and down the kinda steep hill in front of my grandparents' house on a Razor scooter. How fun. Getting used to the higher, steeper parts of the hill as I go down the street for one pass. My brother R is standing there. To avoid hitting him, I turn, wheel catching on the curb and throwing myself into a tree. I could feel that I scraped my cheek pretty badly, so I meandered into my grandparents' house to seek some medical attention. My brother R just staring and smiling at me from the middle of the road. Anyway, I step inside my grandparents' house and my brother R was playing a video game. Inside. And perhaps one instance would be a hallucination, but my cheek was wrapped in gauze and medical tape for multiple weeks. That's not just a hallucination, and thus the first instance likely isn't a hallucination either. So this person saw both of his brothers at some point in time in his life duplicated, doppelgangered, if that's even a verb. Oh my goodness. And I'll state that I haven't had many instances like those in over 2 decades. But like 4 years ago in my previous apartment, I did wake up to a shadowy figure watching over me from my bedroom doorway, which I've chalked up to being sleep paralysis demon. But given the prior experiences, it might not be a sleep paralysis demon. Bro, I want to know what's going on in your life. I will link it in the show notes, like all of the other stories. I feel like maybe we need to check out their other stories. Oh my goodness. Okay, moving on to our final story for the evening. This user is Pancakes So Good from the subreddit True Scary Stories, posted around 2 years ago. And it's called Happened When I Was a Kid, But Still Traumatizes Me. This happened when I was a little girl, about 9 or 10. One summer evening when I was about 9 or 10, there was a bad accident about 2/10 of a mile from our farmhouse. The accident was at the corner of two roads. We lived way out in the country in the Midwest. We weren't home when it happened, but could see the aftermath later that evening. The next day, out of curiosity, I asked my mom if I could ride my bike up to the corner. She said yes, but don't go farther. She was hanging laundry on the clothesline and kept an eye on me as I rode up. We lived in a really safe area where my brother and I rode our bikes all the time, so I wasn't scared. I get to the corner and get off my bike and start looking around at some of the leftover debris. Nothing much, but as a kid, you're just curious. As I'm looking around, two creepy guys in a station wagon pull up, and I felt bad vibes right away. They asked me which one of them was cuter. And all I could think is to run, hop on my bike, and ride as fast as I could towards home. Fortunately, their car was facing west on a gravel road, and I was headed east down a blacktop road, so I got a little bit of a head start. As I looked back, I could see them turn and start following me. I started screaming at the top of my lungs as I was pedaling as fast as I could. My mom saw me and started running towards me. When the car got a little ways down our road and saw my mom, they stopped, turned around again, and headed the other direction. My mom called the police, but not a lot they could do. But they did take the info. Oh, why is there nothing that they can do? There has to be something that they can do in these instances. I'm stressing out by this. Oh my goodness. To this day, the whole incident and their faces are burned in my memory. When I hear stories of little girls being abducted, I think about how that could have been me. Oh my goodness. I want to check the comments on this one. One commenter says, I had a similar experience when I was a lad, maybe 10 or so. I was walking down my street to the local market to buy some snacks, a common enough occurrence in my rural community. A man in a Jeep slowed to match my walking pace. Ooh. He rolled the passenger window down and said, Hey, you need a ride? I said that I was fine and thanked him anyway. He began to coax me. Oh, come on. It's awfully cold today. Sure you don't want to continue walking in the snow? Just get in. I'll take you wherever you need to go. No, really, I'm fine, but thank you. He continued to match my pace while staring at me as I walked down the country road. A few seconds passed and he sped off. I thought it was over, but then he stopped up ahead on the shoulder. I continued walking. As I got closer, the driver's side door opened and he got out. The thing that really gave me the memory burn, still some 40 years later, is how when he exited his vehicle before moving in my direction, he looked all around as if to scan the horizon for potential witnesses. That was what I immediately noticed. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted into the tree line and ran as fast as I could back home. Luckily, it was a very rural area, and there was a huge wooded area that I grew up playing in, climbing trees in, riding my bike in, etc. So I was very familiar with the wooded area and knew it like the back of my hand. I knew exactly which paths to take to get home. I didn't think he bothered to chase me, and I ran so fast that if a panel of Olympic judges would have been there, surely I would have taken the gold. But all these years later, I can still see that man's face, his sunglasses, the Jeep, his parka, his brown curly hair, all of it. And the OP commented, you are very lucky. You definitely don't forget something like that. This thread also has a ton of other really crazy comments that go through all kinds of different stories. And again, if you want to check them out, we will link it in the show notes so that you could read them, because it goes on for a while and they're really good. But I don't know how many stories I could read of abduction things as a mom. I personally, that is one of my biggest fears. And I am slightly helicopter-ish whenever it comes to my kids, that I need to know where they're at, who they're with, and what they're doing at all times. And I just, oh my goodness. And that is one way to ruin a childhood forever. And no, I couldn't. But that is where we're ending it tonight. And tonight's stories reminded us that some memories never really leave us. The things we saw, the things we heard, the things nobody believed, and the moments from childhood that still don't quite make sense all these years later. Maybe they were dreams, maybe they were tricks of the mind, or maybe some questions simply never get answers. Maybe that's why we still remember them. If you have a story you would like to share with us that are like these, or any other experience that you've ever had, we would love to hear them. And if you give us permission, we would love to share them on the podcast as well. You can submit them by sending us an email at statichourpodcast.com. You can also send them to our Discord and submit them there. We would love to hear from you guys. I also very often check our Instagram DMs. You can send one there. Or if you just want to follow along and get all of the between the broadcasts, behind the scenes, and episode updates, check us out on Instagram at Static Hour Podcast. If you're craving even more stories, head on over to our Patreon. You'll find bonus episodes, exclusive content, and transmissions that never make it onto the main broadcast because they're a little darker there. After Hours with Static Hour on Patreon is a fun place to be. If you would like to catch the next broadcast, make sure you're following and subscribed wherever you're listening. And if you love what you hear, leave us a comment or a review somewhere. It helps us get out to other people like you. I'm Brittany, and you've been listening to The Static Hour. We are officially going off the air. Good night.